Now, this technique should be used in advanced, demanding situations. This isn't something you necessarily would need to apply when you're catching up with your mom on the phone you haven't talked to her in 2 weeks or a friend at the bar. This is when you want to create a very distinct perspective in the other person's mind of the kind of person you are and how you value and respect yourself. And that premise is continuing or following through with threads or stories. So what I mean is, say I'm in the middle of telling a story or expressing a thought and something comes up naturally or someone interrupts me to talk about something else more pertinent or not. When that happens, as soon as they're done talking, the tendency is to want to jump back on your thread because you think it's cool, you think it's interesting, you think you can impress them with the thread, whatever reason it may be. By jumping right back on that thread, it's showing a lack of social savvy in that you're clinging to the past, you're not adapting, you're not moving with the free-flowing conversation, but more importantly, you value the conversation so much that you have to go back to what you think you want to talk about. So say you're telling a story, and we were at 15,000 feet and descending, and all of a sudden, the guy comes in and says, "Hey, oh, ma'am, can we get some extra ranch with this salad?" Now, the tendency is to jump back in and say, "Yeah, so at 15,000 feet, what you really want to do is chill out, relax. Act like it's no big deal whatsoever, and then if they think it's important enough, they'll come back to it." And when they do that, you show that you're willing to walk away from that thread. It's not that important to you. Another thing it shows is that it's very important to get their thoughts or their validation on the story. Why else would it be so important for you to finish your story? You're trying to entertain them, you're trying to keep the vibe of the conversation, fair enough. But when you're trying to micromanage your perception, don't be afraid to cut those threads or walk away from threads that other people cut. It shows that you have an abundance of things you can talk about. Nothing is that important, and following through for their entertainment or to get their validation or approval obviously is not something that's important to you. Now, one side note to this. One thing you want to be very careful about is you don't want to act like you have your feelings hurt by them cutting off the thread. So if I'm saying, "And we were at 8,000 feet and going down," and he says, "More, ma'am, more bread," you don't want to be, "Was that story not good enough for you? Was that not interesting?" You want to be the exact opposite. You want to back off of that thread like it's no big deal whatsoever to you. So yeah, we were at 8,000 feet, the plane was going down, people were screaming, "Ma'am, more bread," and you're like, "Yeah, the waitress didn't come around that often, did she?" Like you just totally dropped the thread. You don't care whatsoever. You backed off it. That's a really important distinction to make, because if you back off a thread and act like you're upset by them doing that, well, that's worse. That's much worse than the improvement you're going to make by backing off the thread, because that's showing that you're upset about what they're doing. They're upsetting you, meaning that they're in a more valuable situation of a higher status to have an emotional reaction to the way that they cut you off. So to sum this tip up, so when you show that you're not afraid to walk away from a thread that's cut naturally or intentionally from the person you're talking to, you're showing, number one, you don't put too much value in what they think of you or your story. Number two, that you're living in abundance, that you can come up with as many ideas and things off the cuff to talk about as you want to. And number three, that you just have a lot of respect for yourself and you're willing to walk away from those threads because they don't mean that much to you either. You don't have a big ego and you don't have one big story you're going to drop the bomb and they're going to say, "Oh, that was great, that was great." So keep that in mind next time you're telling a story or you're in a conversation and your thread or story gets cut off.